Hey all, so this is Daniel Goldberg. I am a core faculty member of the Center for Bioethics and Humanities at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. I wanted to do a quick vlog today to talk about a letter that appeared in JAMA Pediatrics entitled "The Electronic Health Record and Acquired Physician Autism." And I want to say a few words, maybe more than a few words, on why I think that this piece is transgressive and it's ethically problematic. And there's at least 3 or 4 different reasons that I can see that this thing is problematic. The first, and maybe, I don't know, arguably the most important one, is that it clearly pathologizes autism. The thing to understand, and this tracks basic ideas in disability studies, is that there are an awful lot of autistic people, advocates for autistic people, disability studies scholars, philosophers of autism, theorists of autism, who reject the idea that autism is a pathology at all. Right, and so here we're just tracking the general critique of the medical model in general. The issue is that the world is really not designed for neurodiverse people. The world is structured and designed for neurotypical people, and the disabling characteristics of our autism are reflective of that fact. If in fact the world was better accommodating and designed to help or to facilitate people of various functionings and capacities, that in fact neurodiverse people really wouldn't be all that disabled by the experience of being neurodiverse, right? So there's a question about whether or not it's really okay to pathologize autism at all. And that's exactly what this letter actually does. It just takes for granted the idea that autism is a disease, it's a pathology. That's fairly common, I know, in the medical world, but that doesn't make it any less problematic for its commonality, especially when there's an awful lot of autistic people and autistic advocates who really deny that, who want to step in and deny that and say, really that there's problem. And we know that there's problems with the medical model, right? The history of disability, the history of disability stigma shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that when we pathologize, that when we reduce disability to a deficit, to a lack, to a pathology, that sometimes bad things happen, both in individual cases and in our interventions and in the policies that we make for disabled people, right? So that's one problem. The second problem is that it actually stigmatizes people with autism, right? Autistic people. I know person first language is controversial, right? So, and so you might think that pathologization is the same thing as stigma, and it's connected, I think, but they're not the same thing, right? Because even if you were to say that autism is fairly conceptualized as a pathology, as a disease, that doesn't mean that it should be stigmatized. And in fact, that's exactly what this letter actually does. It suggests that there is something deviant or negative about the experience of being autistic, and that we should avoid that. And that's the problem with the electronic health record, is that it's just like this negative thing, right? So the letter wouldn't make any sense unless it framed these experiences as adverse, as deleterious, as deviant in their own right, right? And that's exactly what stigma is. Let's remember the basic definition of stigma. It's an in-group marking, and out-group is different on the basis of a shared demographic characteristic. And then the second phase of that is where the in-group marks the out-group as deviant on the basis of that shared demographic characteristic. And that's exactly what this letter actually presumes. It marks out a group, and here we're talking about autistic people, and it judges them as deviant on the basis of that characteristic. So that's problematic. Then the third level of this that's problematic is that it was tweeted out by a major physician scientist, Eric Topol, whose work on social media I really like and appreciate, as shrewd and succinct. And so that's an issue because it means that someone who's really bright and engaged and a physician scientist read the article and didn't see any of the potential problems with it in terms of the pathologization and stigmatization of autistic people and of neurodiversity in general. So that's a problem. Not necessarily surprising, but a problem. And then the fourth problem, which is sort of similar to the third problem, is that the editors of JAMA Pediatrics apparently didn't see any of these problems when they published it, unless they were intentionally trying to be controversial by publishing it. But if they did that, usually you would think that the editors would solicit a piece pointing out some of the issues and critiques so that the readers don't think that there's any kind of endorsement by arrogating, limited and sort of precious space in a prominent journal to this kind of perspective. That the journal didn't do that suggests to me a valid inference that they really didn't see any big problem with it, because again, I don't think they either would have published it or they wouldn't have published it without a critical commentary if they did see a problem. So that's 4 problems with this letter, and I think that it is worth pointing those out, and I think that I agree with the critiques, many critiques that I've seen, which should come first and foremost from disabled people in general, or from autistic people from neurodiverse people who reject the idea that there's anything disabling about autism, which is perfectly great. I have no problem with that at all. So I am neither of those, but I do study stigma, and I am something of an expert on disability stigma. And this letter was, so obviously problematic that I thought it was worth saying a little something and pointing out what some of the problems might be for those who are unclear. So, as always, opinions are mine alone. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Thanks.